So I'm Paul Jansen, a partner with McKinsey Company. I'm here to share some of the highlights from the research we did in the field of prizes. This investigation was both suggested by and supported by the John Templeton Foundation, for which we are very grateful. And we undertook it with a combination team from our philanthropy practice, which is part of our social sector office, and our innovation practices. Specifically, Templeton asked us to look at recent developments in the prize field and examine whether prizes worked as a philanthropic vehicle, and if so, to come up with some best practices for when and how to use them wisely.
See if we can get our slides. Okay.
There we go. So what did we learn? Well, in technical consultant speak, we learned, to quote Matt Bross, that prizes are really cool. They can do things that other vehicles cannot do nearly as well, which makes them a very unique and powerful tool for driving change and innovation. Now, we all understand prizes. They mark achievements in our lives. I still have the first grade penmanship award given to me approximately 45 years ago by Sister Mary Sponza. Now, despite being an old and familiar tool, prizes are undergoing a real renaissance. The aggregate value of large purse prizes, those over $100,000, has more than tripled over the last 5 years. But at least as notable is the variety in the types of prizes now on offer, the diversity of the fields, and quite honestly, the height of their ambition. And that's what struck us more than anything. Now, one of the main drivers is the simple truth that prizes, when well designed and executed, really work. They pay for results, not attempts, are amazingly flexible, and allow a platform for messaging and branding that can be quite attractive to the sponsor. We also observe that good prizes can employ as many as 7 different mechanisms to achieve their goals, and we'll talk briefly about those. And it's not just the 2 prize types that are often talked about, incentive prizes and recognition prizes, but we really felt there were at least 6 different types of prizes that have strengths and relative strengths and weaknesses that make them appropriate for different problems. Good prizes are very tough to do well, and for many sponsors, developing a prize was a trial and error process. But through our discussions and our case studies, we really do believe there are some best practices that can be employed, and they can aid in that process of converting an aspiration, however vaguely defined, to a specific goal and ultimately to an outcome. And that really is the primary challenge of prizes. Lastly, we looked at the outlook for prizes. We believe that outlook is strong. We surveyed current prize sponsors, and a number were planning to increase their use, sometimes dramatically. Government, the U.S. government, among others, are looking at using prizes aggressively in the future. And the emergence of entities like we have represented here today, the XPRIZE Foundation, in a set of Idea Crossing, 9 Sigma, there's others, really is going to dramatically reduce some of the complexity and challenge of designing prizes for new sponsors. Because of all of this, we have quite a bullish outlook for the continued growth and innovation in the use of prizes. So with that, I'll pass it to Jonathan.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul. So I think we'd echo Matthew in what he said in his introduction, that a prize is an old idea that still has great potential today. And we started the research by looking at the historical record for prizes and kind of feel that that is full of examples of the same power that prizes have today. The Longitude Prize, for example, that's a great example of prizes' openness. When it was launched, the smart money was on the astronomers to deliver a solution, and of course it was a clockmaker that won in the end. The Food Preservation Prize established in revolutionary France. That's a good example of effectiveness. It set an achievable challenge in an area where the market wasn't delivering, and after a few years, it produced a solution that is still basically in use today in terms of the basic technology. Or you could look at the Royal Agricultural Society's prizes that were awarded for about 100 years in the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Kind of an example of prizes flexibility, how you can turn it into more than it is. If you look at them individually, they're point solution prizes more or less for a particular advance in technology. But when you combine them with the fact that the Society exhibited all the entries and awarded discretionary prizes for unexpected technological breakthroughs, it becomes more like an exposition prize that is really sharing great ideas with a bunch of potential investors. And then again, as we heard this morning, another great example is the Orteig Prize. That's a classic example of how everyone gets a prize. If you design a goal that's aspirational and achievable, you get what you got in Lindbergh's case, something that captured the imagination and the widespread interests of not just the problem-solving community, but also the general public that may go on to invest in that technology. As Paul said, there's been a big surge in prize capital in our estimation over the last 30 years, and that was the first thing we looked at, is what is the state of prizes today? And the short answer is that they're booming. The chart that we've got up right now is based on a data set of 227 prizes with more than $100,000, and it tracks the total capital available from those prizes each year. And it updates the one that's in the printed report that you've got. It now has some 2008 data in it and has tweaked the list of prizes. But as you can see at the top end, that's 337 million in available capital in 2008. And I think an important thing to note is that almost 250 million of that capital has entered the field in just the last 10 years. So just in this small subset of prizes, that's a growth rate of roughly 14% a year. And we know some of the multi-million-dollar entrants that we see up on the slide there. As Paul said, the growth has been driven by new sponsors and new fields, kind of a shift in the mix of sponsors that we're seeing and the problems to which they apply the prizes. We found that almost half of the prize capital that is in our data set that's been introduced in the last decade has come from relatively new philanthropic entrants, so foundations or nonprofits established in the last 10 or 15 years. And there's not an exact correlation between the youth of a foundation and an innovative approach, of course, but I think it's safe to say that a lot of the capital is coming from donor institutions that are comfortable with opportunities for experimentation and new approaches to risk and innovation that a prize can offer. And then at the same time, we're seeing a shift in the kind of problems that prizes address. 10 years ago, the arts and humanities represented 1/3 of the prizes in the database by value, but now that share is less than 10%, and the bulk of the money, as you can see, is going to areas like aviation, science, and the environment. And the other category, which is also growing, that holds some interest too, because that's where you'll find things like the Ibrahim Prize for achievements in African leadership, which is targeting governance improvements, which is a very different application of a prize. So if we were to summarize the last decade in a sentence, it would be a broader range of sponsors is using larger prizes more often to address a wider variety of objectives and in more innovative ways.
Thanks, John. And if we move to the topic of why the boom, there really is an interaction between some of these social trends we've talked about, new wealth, the internet, frustration with current approaches, distributed computing power, and other, with these attributes of prizes that are in some ways very distinctive of prizes. The success contingent awards, openness, we've already talked about a fair deal, the flexibility to use them in lots of different ways. And then lastly, this expressiveness, this ability of prizes to allow a sponsor to say, I think this is important, I think this is what excellence is, and I think you should at least think about and understand that perspective. Those attributes, interacting with those social trends, we really think has driven at least part of the growth of prizes. But as to why they work, I think it's a different story. We talked about 7 drivers. If you think about the ecosystem of a prize, right? You have a problem, you have a community of potential solvers, you don't quite know who's in that community, and you have the broader public. All of those are affected. Now, and as I said earlier, we identified 7 levers. The first lever is the simple ability of a prize to articulate what is excellence. It can highlight what is superlative performance. It can use that to communicate and inform others in society about new ideas or important ways to think about things. Excellence was the most identified source, or most commonly identified goal of the prizes we looked at in our database. That's starting to shift, but it hasn't shifted yet. The second thing a prize can do is it can focus a community. It can shift the attention of a problem-solving community in a way that says, this is important, spend time on it. The Netflix prize is a great example. Attracted over 30,000 entrants, many of whom spent countless hours on the task of improving their corporate movie recommendation algorithm. Now, well-designed prizes can be extremely media-friendly, and this gives them the power to influence public's perception. Again, they allow a sponsor to say, we think this is good, you should too. They can also, though, stimulate consumer demand. In the case of the Man Booker Prize for Commonwealth Fiction, or the Ansari XPRIZE, which has clearly played a role in changing perceptions about the accessibility of personal spaceflight. We spent a lot of time talking about the openness of prize competition and the way it gives them the ability to attract new competitors. The only comment I'd make is, recent research out of HBS, speaks to the belief that the farther a solver is from the area of the problem, the more likely they are to solve it. A tremendously interesting finding when you think about it. Prizes, though, can also strengthen a community by making connections between competitors or between funders and ideas. The Milken Educator Awards, for example, create a network of past winners to share ideas or to use their special status to influence policymakers or business leaders. Other prizes, the Ashoka Changemakers, the Mo Ibrahim Prize for African Governance, do that same thing. The idea to create networks that outlast the award and really become another vehicle for strengthening a community. Prizes can also educate competitors, build skills, or change behaviors far into the future. Dean Kamen, who will be here tomorrow, has this competition called the First Robotics. Teams of students get together using a kit to take on a variety of robotics challenges. Interestingly, it's not about the quality of the prize or the quality of the invention, but it is the effect it has cumulatively on those students over time, who studies show are much more likely to pursue a career in the sciences, are much more likely to get involved in community service. Lastly, prizes do provide valuable leverage for a sponsor's investment in the form of money, but also in the form of access to facilities or intellectual property. Peter has and no doubt will speak to how the Ansari XPRIZE, the $10 million prize, prompted $100 million in investment. But it's not just XPRIZE. This happens in almost all incentive prize competitions. So these are kind of the drivers about why we feel prizes work. I'll briefly touch on the types of prizes, and I won't go into the details, but participation prize is easy to understand, right? Sister Mary Sponza wasn't looking for me to make a great contribution to calligraphy. She was teaching me to dot my I's, cross my T's, etc. They really do seek to build skills. Exemplars are really the classic recognition prize. Network prizes build a community. Exposition prizes allow you to highlight societal needs and a variety of ways that they might be solved. It allows you also to frame those issues in a way that provide guidance to others. Point solution prizes are really the classic incentive prize. They make a lot of sense when there's a defined problem, but it's unclear who's going to solve it. And lastly, the market stimulation prizes, an example being XPRIZE among others. It's really taking it to the highest level, which is not only we're going to solve a problem, but we're going to stimulate public perceptions about either the availability of supply or the nature of demand. And in so doing, really stimulate markets.
I think when we get to the discussion, I think one topic that's already been coming out in the panels is some of the myths around prizes. So here's just a sample of 5 preconceptions that we either encountered or maybe even had when we started doing the work. I'll just say them very briefly. There's a myth that there's only 2 types of prizes out there, inducement and recognition, right? And as you've just heard from Paul, we think there's at least a half dozen in room for inventing more. There's a myth that the size of the purse is the main determinant of the prize's success, and to us, that doesn't at all capture what motivates contestants, and there is a lot more room for strategy in terms of their motivation and the approaches you can take. There's a myth that it's entirely about competition. It's very, very important. But in prizes like the Netflix prize or the Changemakers competitions, you see a lot of collaborative approaches now. There's a myth that it's all about the winner. And in fact, some of the people who don't win end up with better outcomes in the long run. And there's a myth that prizes are easy. And I think we in the end came up with 5 steps to developing, designing and delivering an effective prize, which are in the report. And we tried to identify best practices around all of them and advocate that people pay equal attention to each of these 5 steps rather than just jumping into setting up a goal and a purse.
So let me close by asserting our belief that we really do think the outlook for continued growth in the use of prizes is very strong. Sponsors are looking at expanding their activity. The emergence of this prize facilitation industry will make it much easier than it has been in the past, as those best practices are now incorporated and become standard practices. The net effect of that will be to make the return on prizes for a sponsor much greater. Our overall conclusion: that prize is an old idea, but a surprisingly powerful one in our modern society. And we believe that every organization seeking to drive significant social change or breakthroughs should at least consider the possibility of using prizes as part of their strategy to address the many challenges we have. And we hope our discussion tomorrow will identify opportunities to do exactly that. Thank you.
Thanks.